So Sony is back with another movie in the Venom franchise, and that's Venom: The Last Dance, and it was a movie. However, it was definitely better than the first three. Now in this video, we're going to be breaking down the plot, talking about Knull and his comic book origins, the connections to Carnage from the comics, the aliens, and so much more, especially with the symbiotes they had. We got some Easter eggs, references, we're going to break down that ending and the post-credit scenes. Sit tight and get ready for a lot of stuff to go over, because even though this movie is not always 100% comic book accurate, there is still a lot of stuff that is from the comics. So let's start off with the beginning of the movie. Knull was barely in it. I knew from the very beginning when they introduced him in the trailer that we were barely going to get him in the movie. There's no way in hell they're going to make Knull the villain of the third movie without any setup. This movie just set him up and what his goals are, because he's trying to get the Codex, which is currently inside Venom and Eddie. Now in the comics, the symbiote Codex refer to both the trace amounts of the living abyss left in the bodies of symbiote hosts, with the greatest concentrations being found in the host's spinal cords, which connects to absolute Carnage in the comics, where Carnage was going around taking the spines out of past hosts, which when he did that, he ended up becoming reborn and was connected to Knull after absorbing a piece of the Grendel symbiote dragon, which Knull created and remote piloted. Which, of course, we didn't see a Grendel in this. It would have been pretty cool to see a flying symbiote dragon, but we didn't get that yet. And I'm hoping we do eventually get that, just to see a giant monster symbiote. And one of the cool things, too, is this codec, the symbol on it is the same symbol as Knull's symbol from the comics, which I like that connection, just connecting it to what he is from his comic origin, and just connecting everything overall. Now, in this movie, the opening scene is Knull sending xenophages after Venom. And in the comics, the xenophages are actually a thing in the comics, which I was actually surprised, because they have no connection to Knull, but they are symbiote hunters, which in this they have the same purpose. Now, the xenophages were introduced in Venom Hunted back in 1996. Now in the movie, Knull was imprisoned by the symbiotes on Clintar, which is just like how it was in the comics. And if you don't know what the comics are and don't know who Knull was an eldritch god of darkness and the creator of the symbiotes, while residing in the primordial void that exists between the 6 and 7 cosmoses. He was awakened when the Celestials invaded his kingdom of darkness with light. Knull was chosen by the Celestials to serve as the King in Black. He rejected that responsibility, with the first symbiote in the form of a sword, the All Black, which we did see this sword back in Thor Love and Thunder when we saw Gore the God Butcher, because Gore uses Knull's sword, which obviously the connections are not connected in the movie, but it is a cool little reference. Now, after Knull obtained that sword, he decapitated one of the Celestials and used its severed head's divine power to refine the blade, linking both Knull and the Necro Sword to the fallen cosmic god. Now, in the comics, that head is actually nowhere, which is cool because we saw nowhere in Guardians of the Galaxy, and I'm kind of curious if they'll ever connect that Celestial to the Necro Sword. Again, we are dealing with the multiverse with the Sonyverse, but it would be cool to see some of these pop up in the Marvel Cinematic one as well. Now, as we go back into the comics, Knull was waging a war against the light to return the universe to the void. Knull became a legendary figure of divine terror, but eventually found himself stranded on a nameless planet after Gore stole his sword, which when we look at what happened in Thor Love and Thunder, we had the light god who had just taken out the dark god, and in the comics they both took each other out, and Gore finished the job with the light one, unlike in Thor Love and Thunder. And it's pretty cool to see how this all got tied in, because Knull is a relatively new character that came in after Gore, so seeing how his lore is built into it was pretty cool. Now after all this, while he was trapped on the planet, he experimented with his powers and discovered he could bond his living abyss with lesser creatures, which ended up creating symbiotes. Which after he created the symbiotes, he created the hive mind, which has been referenced by Venom already in the movies, where they reference the hive mind of the symbiotes always all being connected. I'm actually surprised they didn't dive more into that this movie, other than talking about the monsters were coming for them, which were the xenophages. And after Knull created this hive mind, he proceeded to conquer worlds and form a fleet of symbiote dragons, aka the Grendels. While he was on Earth, he was attacked by Thor Odinson, fought him for a bit, and after that, the symbiotes merged with the closest host they could find. So the hive was now infected with the concept of honor and nobility, so the symbiotes ended up turning on Knull, and they trapped him on the throne world, which was called Clintar. Obviously, they didn't go this deep into the lore in the movie because they don't have access to some of these characters, but it is cool to see where Knull came from in the comics, but it is a cool storyline, and Knull is a pretty cool character, and it's going to be awesome to see him in live action. I just don't really trust Sony with it. But as we go forward in the movie starts back on Earth 616 at the end of No Way Home, where Venom is still on that Earth until Doctor Strange's spell goes off and he gets sent right back home, which was different than the other characters because when we saw No Way Home, they all kind of phased out of existence, where in this, he literally just got launched launched through a portal. I don't know if Sony knows how to follow their own lore, but it would have been nice if they just kept it the same. But I do like how they showed the scene again and just made fun of the Infinity Stones and Thanos and how the alien doesn't want stones, they want brains. So that was just like a fun nod to his character and how Venom likes to eat brains. I liked having that scene. Disappointed we didn't get any Spider-Man reference in this movie whatsoever, but I did like that we got some of that. Venom even made a joke about being tired of multiverses, which I think we all are. I think we're tired of the multiverse, and to find out that Spider-Man 4 might be a multiverse movie kind of sucks, but I guess we'll see when that movie comes out, because maybe they might change it again and it might be what we all want, and that's street level with Daredevil and Kingpin. But as Eddie's back in his universe at that bar, they end up making themselves a drink, and it's a little fun scene of them joking around, and they end up leaving another piece of the symbiote, which is Venom's shedding symbiotes, which I thought this was going to start creating multiple symbiotes throughout the world, because that's kind of what they teased, as it wants to survive. And in the comics, Venom's offspring have also been multiple symbiotes. One of the main ones we all know is Carnage. So I thought this was going to be kind of the setup to have multiple symbiotes that were around because of Venom, and because they're kind of setting up him with the Codex, Sony might have used that to push and make more symbiotes, which in this movie, they didn't end up doing that. We ended up going to Area 51. We saw a bunch of symbiotes they had captured from when they first initially landed on the planet. So I feel like that storyline where he was shedding was kind of that, oh, they're shedding. Okay, now let's forget about that for the entire movie, which again felt like a classic Sony move. Let's just add all these storylines and kind of forget about them as we go through the movie. But it does turn out that when in this universe, the cops are after him for killing Mulligan, which in the last movie, we saw that Mulligan was not dead. His eyes were glowing, and it looks like they completely retconned this from Let There Be Carnage. Saw him with the glowing eyes setting up, saying monsters, which does tie back into him here with the symbiote, but they completely got rid of the fact that he had the toxin symbiote on him, and they just put it on him when he got to Area 51. Editor Antonio here. Turns out that I missed a line in the movie. They apparently said that the symbiote abandoned him, which I still think is really dumb. I don't understand why they set up toxin in the last movie and then didn't follow through. And now I'm gonna have to cut out parts in this video where I turned around and said they ruined toxin's design, which, you know, technically they did by not adding him into this movie. I don't know why they did this. I don't know why they retconned that. I honestly thought this movie was going to be Venom dealing with toxin, and it seems like they just kind of threw all that out the window after the last one. But also, the 3 Venom movies have just been him dealing with symbiotes, and it hasn't been anything else. I think Sony doesn't really know what to do with his character other than the symbiotes. So I guess we'll see what goes on forward, especially after that ending, but we'll talk about that when we get there. We got multiple references to him being the Lethal Protector, which is the iconic panel from him in the comics. The first Lethal Protector moment is him stopping that dogfighting ring, which I thought was a lot of fun. It had some cool scenes, having some cool action, saving the animals, and you know, who doesn't love saving animals? So that was cool. Also, just seeing them kind of joke around and they try to say, "We are Venom." But it turns out they have literally only been together for a year. After 3 movies, it's only been a year. Makes literally no sense. I don't understand what Sony's doing with this timeline, but that's where we are today. But as he's fighting that, we end up meeting General Strickland, who is after the symbiotes, and they're capturing them and bringing them to Area 51. In the comics, Rick Strickland was an alias for the symbiote known as Tyrannosaurus, who was extracted from the Grendel, the symbiote dragon, and he bonded to a soldier named Rex Strickland during the Vietnam War. Under the influence of the dark god Knull, Tyrannosaurus rampaged across Vietnam, was inspired by Logan of all people, and Rex's nobility to break free of Knull's control. When Rex was killed by the Nick Fury life model decoy, Tyrannosaurus assumed his identity and became an agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. So in the comics, he was Rex till Rex died, and he became Rex, a symbiote living on his own, kind of still under the influence of Knull when Knull started to appear. I thought it was pretty cool that they led into this character. Obviously not at all the same from the comics, but it was a cool reference to who he was. Now, we end up meeting Dr. Teddy Payne, who in the comics is Thaddeus Payne. In this series, she had a brother who died when they were both struck by lightning, and the current went through her and killed him. It seemed like a random subplot that wasn't really going anywhere until we got the Agony symbiote at the very end of this movie. But again, it's just like another story plot that Sony added in that just didn't feel like it fit. Now, in the comics, Thaddeus Payne, after a terrible accident took away his tactical sensations, Payne became obsessed with medical freaks and donned a pair of mechanical surgical gauntlets to start conducting horrendous experiments on the terminally ill people, which ended up putting him in line with Venom, and Venom fought him. Cool little reference to a character I would have never heard of. He doesn't really have much on him in the comics either. He's just like a smaller, he's definitely a smaller character. Find out in Area 51, they have a bunch of symbiotes. There were all these different colors, which we didn't really kind of figure out who is who until the end of the movie. But in Area 51, we had Agony, who ended up bonding with Teddy Payne. We had Lasher, who ended up bonding with Thady Christmas. And Sadie is not a character from the comics. She's an original character for this movie. I've been seeing people say that Lasher was actually attached to Mulligan, but from the way they did the movie, Christmas makes a lot more sense with the character design and the way it was fighting. When they all got released, we ended up seeing a white symbiote, which I thought could have been a reference to Anti-Venom. We got a brown one, which could be a reference to Phage. And then there was a bunch of other ones that were just kind of random colors. We had a two-headed one. We had a fire one. Like, these characters, I don't know who they are. I couldn't find any comic book reference on them, so it feels like Sony just made a bunch of symbiotes, gave them wacky powers, and threw them in. Which, hey, it led to a really great final battle at the end, just seeing all these different powers go off. It would have been cool to get a symbiote that was more looking like some of the ones from the comics. And I mean, when they're in this base, too, they do give us more lore on Knull and how the symbiotes came from him. And Mulligan's character was pretty much the explainer of the movie, giving us all the lore. Venom and Eddie, one of them needs to be taken out in order for the Codex to disappear. So he was just the kind of character warning them of the upcoming threat, which it felt like a downplay for his character. They just kind of pushed him on the sidelines, and I really wish they did more with Toxin, because then they just ended up killing him in the end, and that just felt kind of lazy. Now it was cool to see the Xenophage tracks Venom in his true form, because those things move stupidly fast. The one that first found them literally jumped from the ground and just jump to that plane without an issue, showing how powerful they are. And the fact that they can just repair themselves just makes them the ultimate killing machines. And the way they explain the Codex is since Eddie died and Venom saved him, when they did that, they kind of bonds in their genes mix, creating the Codex. So now if one of them dies, the Codex is gone. Kind of a foreshadow for what was going to happen at the end, where Venom sacrifices himself to save Eddie. They did multiple times in this movie when they were foreshadowing what was going to come down, like talking about how Venom really wants to go to New York and how he really wants to go there. So kind of showing that Venom has these goals that he wants to do, but he's never going to reach them. And like, when we go forward more, the Venom horse was fun. That was cool, just seeing Venom go on another animal. Then also seeing him end up going on a fish and a frog. And even in the credits, we get to see a bunch of different Venom animals, which I thought was a lot of fun, because just I like animals, so seeing a Venom version was cool. We even got a Venom mermaid, which was just Eddie Brock with a Venom tail, which I thought was kind of funny. And that was all while Strickland was after them. Eddie got his first kill too, not one that Venom did. Eddie did it himself. To be fair, if Eddie didn't kill the guy, he would have died himself, but you can see how that affected him. Now, because they talk about how this has only been a year since they bonded together, it makes sense that Eddie's never been in a situation like this other than fighting the symbiote, where he would have to kill an actual human being. So of course it's going to affect him. Now, when we end up meeting Martin and his family, the person everyone thought was going to be the Lizard because it's played by the same actor, it seemed like an out of place part of the movie. Having Eddie meet up with them, go on this little road trip with them. I don't know, it just didn't really do much other than kind of focus on Eddie and Venom's bond and their friendship as they talked while in the van. And it also set up Eddie having like this hero moment where he does save them when everyone's caught in the crossfire as the Xenophages are attacking. But they honestly didn't really seem like they needed to be part of this movie, and I don't understand why they fully put them in. So let me know down in the comments what you thought of their part of the movie. When they eventually got to Vegas, they had some Easter eggs and references, one of them being Venom calls himself a celestial being, which in the comics, he kind of becomes one, because he becomes the god of the symbiotes after the whole Knull event, which is pretty freaking cool, and I could see that as a reference to that, or a reference to where he gets all the powers to fight Knull, so I'm gonna go with that. And then Venom calls Eddie the sexiest man alive, which in real life, Tom Hardy was UK's sexiest man alive back in 2021. So I thought that was kind of fun. I wasn't expecting to like the little dance scene. It was fun seeing Venom dance with Mrs. Chen, just having some good moments, but I was not expecting Eddie to get captured so quickly after being attacked by the Xenophage and then Strickland. Like, it just all happened in an instant where Xenophage came in. They took off the symbiote, hid, Strickland came in, captured him, and they left. That felt very, very rushed. Honestly, if they didn't have the dancing scene, probably would have went different. After they get captured and they're there, Dr. Payne ends up helping Venom escape by letting him bond to her, creating a She-Venom. So we got to see She-Venom again. That was cool. It helped Venom save Eddie once Strickland shot him for Eddie killing his man. So kind of an eye for an eye situation. And then everything goes to shit, where the Xenophages attack, and this is when all the symbiotes help out, because Toxin first starts off by saving Venom and then dies. Again, felt like a wasted part of the character. They could have at least gave us the design to make it worthwhile, but it definitely felt like a waste. Eder Antonio here again. You can clearly see what I meant by my whole part about talking about Toxin kind of got changed because of finding out it wasn't Toxin. Then when the other symbiotes get released, they all start bonding with random people. Christmas becomes a Lasher, which I thought was really cool. The brown one, which I think is Phage. The two-headed one. The white one that could be a reference to Anti-Venom, plus other greens and blue colors. Like, again, they felt like they just kind of put a bunch of colors. Here's a symbiote, made him dress up and did some cool stuff, just to have this cool symbiote battle. A battle I was not expecting, and calling more Xenophages the impossible aliens they could fight, but he gave us some pretty cool moments with Lasher, fighting them off. Venom and Eddie and Lasher using the freaking chopper blades to cut some of them up. Eddie in the hero moment, saving Martin and his family. Like, it gave us good moments in this big fight, but also gave us some pretty dark ones. Like, one of Strickland's men gets his legs ripped off by a xenophage, which was crazy. And my first thought was, hey, this is a reference to Flash Thompson, because in the comics, before Flash Thompson becomes Agent Venom, he actually loses both legs in combat and then ends up becoming Venom to serve his country, and then later down the road becomes Agent Anti-Venom. So that guy who got his legs ripped off could be Flash Thompson. Who knows? We never actually got any names other than the main characters. Now, in the end, after this big fight, Venom and Eddie have to take on the xenophages to save the planet, leading Venom to absorbing them all, throwing Eddie to the side, and bringing them all to an acid bar to just drop acid on them, saving the planet. Which, in this moment, Venom does say, bye for now. Which makes me think that he's not fully dead and that he will come back later down the road. If Venom is supposed to be the leading character in this Sonyverse because we don't have a Spider-Man in it yet, it would be very weird to kill him off in the third movie as you're setting up all these other anti-hero slash villain movies, hero movies, and not going anywhere with them. And in this moment too, like, Strickland blows up everything to take him out, blowing up the whole facility, which I thought was a reference to the comics as well, because when Knull's manifestation managed to rip the Venom and Tyrannosaurus symbiotes from Eddie and tried to simulate them into the Grendel, Eddie detonated all the sonic grenades at once. With Knull's manifestation weakened, the resulting explosion, the Tyrannosaurus symbiote was able to rebel and drag him into a blast furnace, take out the Grendel symbiote, seemingly killing Knull in the process, which doesn't happen because the comic book event still happens afterwards and Knull becomes a bigger threat. But I thought him blowing himself up with a reference to this moment from the comic book. Now, in the moment when the explosion's going off, Dr. Payne breaks this vial that has the Agni symbiote in it, saves Christmas at lightning speed, goes back to her being struck by lightning, so that whole plot that kind of felt irrelevant was just to have this little cool scene where she gets Agony and blitzes out of there in a second, which in the comics, Agony does not have lightning powers, so I really don't understand why they added it. Hey, I guess they just wanted to do something cool and do some kind of flash power for her. But now the movie's over. Eddie's free because he saved the world. His name is exonerated and he can just go live his life. He heads to New York to do that, goes to the Statue of Liberty because Venom really wanted to see it. So he's doing it in honor of his friend. And the good part too about this ending, which was really touching, was showing Venom and Eddie over the year, having their moments and showing how they became really close friends and how they were best friends. Like, that was one of the things they did really well at the end, was setting all that up. Now, one of the teases that would be freaking amazing and probably shocking for everyone is seeing a spider-like character swinging in the background. That means Eddie could still look for Spider-Man, meet him, and eventually get Venom back, and then they could fight Spider-Man. But in the end, it asks the biggest question. Is Venom really dead? Is this really the last movie? Tom Hardy did say he would come back for a Spider-Man versus Venom movie, so who knows? Only time will tell him. Even though most characters say that their last movies here, sometimes they end up coming back anyways. And one of the things I was thinking too is that I wonder if there's any codex left in Eddie, because in the comics, the codex kind of gets stored in the spine of the host. So that would mean Eddie might still have some of that codex in him, and that could bring back Venom eventually. Especially if there's a small symbiote piece out there, like we saw at the beginning of the movie, that could bring him back to life. Especially with the hive mind, his memories will still be out there, so he can just come right back. And Venom did say, bye for now, so that's definitely a tease for him coming back in the future. It's either that, or the symbiote in the MCU could come into play, as Knull is in between the universes on Eddie's Earth, so it could be a multiversal thing with the hive mind coming into play, where if the symbiote bonds with Peter, it'll send off a detector to Knull, notifying him that Codex symbiote is back, and that could all tie into live-action Spider-Verse coming in to face Knull. At least that's what I'm thinking, especially with the mid-credit scene where we have Knull needing another codex so he can get out of his prison, and it's pretty much setting up the next movie, an Avengers level threat. So it has to be in a compilation movie, Spider-Verse or something down the line, where we have multiple characters coming together to fight him. Knull does say the King in Black is awake, his title in the comics, and he says he's going to destroy their world. So he's got to come back. Is the Sonyverse even strong enough to go against this villain? We have Madam Web and her Spider-Women. We have technically the MCU Spider-Man. Then we have Venom, Kraven. There's really nothing to go against them. So it's an Avengers level threat without the Avengers. So I honestly have no idea how they're supposed to play this, but if they end up wanting to work with Marvel, it could be a huge MCU Sonyverse crossover as they take on Knull. But honestly, with everything going on with Sony, I don't really trust what they're going to do, but I also have literally no idea what they're going to do because they throw curveballs left and right. And who knows, the curveball could be that Spider-Man 4 ends up being Tom Holland getting the symbiote and connecting to Knull in the Sonyverse. Instead of getting a Daredevil Kingpin grounded storyline like we wanted, it might be more of that multiversal thing once again, And I guess we'll just have to see how that goes. We even had a post-credit scene in this, which is literally just a guy from the bar who was taken to Area 51 and escaped at the end of the movie because it blew up and they forgot about him. And then having the cockroach standing next to the agony vial with a little electricity going off. People were like, oh, look, Venom's alive. It's confirmed. But that was just the same vial Pain used to release agony. So I don't think it's connected to Venom. But there is a tease here where they do talk about how cockroaches survived apocalyptic events, which could be a tease to Venom surviving this apocalyptic event of him dying. Maybe a piece of him survived, and now he has to go find Eddie to rebond with him. I think a lot of random things come from this movie. It was a chaotic mess. They still did their comic book accurate stuff, which I did think was cool. They did change a lot that didn't really make a lot of sense, but honestly, Sony doesn't make a lot of sense half the time. But I want to hear from you. What did you think of this movie? What Easter eggs and references did you notice? And what do you think they're going to do with Knull? I'm curious. Let's talk about it in the comments down below. Thanks for watching this movie breakdown. If you liked it, hit the like, hit the subscribe button. It helps out the channel a lot, and you get to stay up to date with all my Marvel DC breakdowns. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time.